The first question someone asks you when you move to a new place is if you like it. In every state I've resided in, someone, if not everyone, has asked me that question. And in every state, I've had that one thing that mesmerizes me. In Albany, New York, it's been the architecture. On walks with Gypsy, we often turn down alleys and streets that inspire my mind to imagine what this city could have looked like many years before my time. I create a film, a memory. It's a very thin door, however, between fiction and reality. People's fascination with blood and gore is interesting to me, because if many stepped foot into a real live version of a film set, the memory they'd create would be far different than the emotions and flashbacks we get from scenes out of a Shonda Rhimes show. Today's guest is one who's witnessed some of those catastrophic, once-in-a-lifetime events that flow through our veins. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. You are tuning in to And That's Okay. I am your host, Paulina Butska, and today we are joined with Will Charbonneau. Will, you and I know each other through the Cohoes Firefighters Union president, through Rob, who reached out to me before this show even launched officially. He heard that I'm doing a mental health podcast and he's like, we need to connect. You're local, we are local, and we are in full support of making sure that first responders get the mental health, the proper mental health, that they need. You are a retired firefighter, and you have been on the job for many, many years, have seen a tremendous amount of incredible things, and a tremendous amount of trauma all at the same time. So today's episode, we are calling it, I Have PTSD, and That's Okay. As we were talking about this episode, that was one of the things that I asked you. I asked you, how did we want to kind of phrase this? Are we going to talk about the job? And the PTSD aspect is really what stuck, right? Because we want to make sure that people are comfortable with saying, hey, I suffer with PTSD, and that's okay. Let's talk a little bit about your journey, where you are, and kind of what started your advocacy for mental health and PTSD.
Put it into some perspective, very young 22-year-old guy gets on the fire department, with all the ambition and dreams and goals and excitement of the fire service, and ended up in a nearly 30-year career. It was 29 and a half years at the end. And I look back at it and say, God, I love the career, the best career in the world. And I can find so many positives in it, but over time and experience and aging, it kind of wore me down over time. And so I ended up at the end with a clinical diagnosis of severe PTSD. There's a lot of realities that come with that diagnosis. There's many emotions that are attached to it. I've been retired now for nearly 2.5 years or so. I'm a current fire safety officer for Russell Sage Colleges, the Albany Law School, and the Albany College of Pharmacy, doing their basically code enforcement and state compliance for fire and general safety. I landed in a good place. It's not the fire service. It's not all the adrenaline and the things people talk about, but it keeps me somewhat involved, we'll say that. So, and as far as our relationship, Rob, you got to meet Rob Wattsman. He's a great outgoing guy, and he's been an advocate, and he was with me through the end of the journey in the fire service. He was very helpful in working with me in starting our EAP program in the firehouse.
Let's talk about what the EAP program is for anybody who's not familiar with that.
It's your general employee EAP, employee assistance program, but it's in regards to mental health. So we've learned over time they're losing more firefighters annually due to death by dying by suicide than the cancer studies that were the big thing of the past 10 years or so. It's okay to tell you that I have friends in the firehouse right now that are battling cancer. It's not okay to say I have somebody battling PTSD. So we look at the injury or illness in the firehouse as one thing that's acceptable. It's almost the badge of honor kind of thing. But mental health was not. People look at you a little different. Again, the stigmatism that went on. So I read a lot about it, and it became a topic. So as an officer, I studied the topic and I started to see it in other people. The interesting thing was I did not see it in myself. I went to the city first, and they said, Well, that's why you have your healthcare. So you just use your healthcare for mental health. And I'm like, well, it's kind of different. It's a different thing to be on your own. So an EAP program kind of keeps us together, part of a team thing, right? So, and we're all about the team, the firefighters, the brotherhood and sisterhood. So I said, then we should pay for it ourselves. And Rob did all the legwork. It was very inexpensive to start, but the union had to pay for it. So the first time I brought it up, they said no. And then we lost a retiree to alcoholism. We lost another retiree. And I said, how many more retirees are we going to watch falter here? They're retiring, and we're finding that once they started tracking these things and suicide, death by suicide, they realized this is haunting us years later, which you saw in military service. After the loss of a great brother firefighter retired that we all loved, they got on board, let's say that. Being the advocate at the time, we brought in Jake Orshian, who's the chief of Bout Community Fire Department, the volunteer department next door to us, and he battled PTSD and still does. And he put a show on the road, as I say, and just started going to firehouses, wanted to be an advocate and tell his story. And so I said, yeah, let's get him in here. So he comes in, I've known him for years. And as he told his story, he was going on about signs and symptoms of PTSD. And I said to everybody, he was sucking the air right out of the room for me. It's like, I was just thinking, oh, this is me. I have every one of these things happening. And I literally got to the point where I couldn't even speak. So I sat in silence in the training. And when I went to speak to Jake, I literally just went, I couldn't get a word out. So I said, wow, I'm deep in this. And he recognized it for what it was and said, it's okay. It's okay. We'll get you some help. And so then I ended up in the EAP program session that I started. We're supposed to be some of the bravest people in the world. We run in the burning buildings. They take us in the fire academy and they reverse the fight or flight instinct. Instead of running out of the burning building, they're going to teach us to overcome fear and go into it. Much of the training is, overcoming fear of heights, overcoming fear of confined spaces, overcoming fear of fire, So they teach you how to overcome. But I said here, one of the scariest things I had to do was walk into a therapist's office.
Isn't that strange that the only thing we're actually afraid of is our own selves?
That's a great point you just made. A lot of the stigmatism, I think, is people see it in themselves already. And that's why we don't want to talk about it. So it's so common. Mental health issues are so common that it's just widespread that we don't want to talk about this. We're not going to, because I think everybody in 30 years in a career of going into patients' homes and saying, do you have any medications? I realize everybody has a medication, and most of them have something to do with anxiety or stress. It's okay to go to a regular doctor and get some medication for something like that. But sure. I'll tell you that to walk in the first time to go in and tell the story, I kind of, okay, take a breath and blah, 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 blah. And I just dumped everything on this woman. And she was not for me. I felt like she wasn't listening. I felt like she was kind of detached, and I did not have a good experience, to the point where I'm done, never telling that story again. Got myself to come here. She does not care, and I'm done. Don't know why. Probably still knew I needed to do it, but I went again. And so speaking to the person in charge, who is my therapist, Amanda Keller, I'll just say her name. But she said, I so apologize you feel that way. Can I talk with you? And it turns out we just clicked. And 3 years later, she's still my therapist.
I was very surprised when Rob first reached out to me, because I remember when I first started doing a PTSD series in Lafayette, Louisiana, when I worked there, one of the things that I wanted to do was broaden the idea and the discussion around PTSD, because for so long we would just hear our military veterans are the ones that suffer with PTSD. And I think for so long people thought that those are the only people who can suffer with PTSD. Right. So when I started to do a series on PTSD and I started going around to our local fire departments, police departments, I had a lot of pushback. Specifically, I remember from the fire department, who I'd always worked with, had great stories with. And all of a sudden, when I started talking mental health, they were like, back up, lady, we don't have issues here. Like, that's not what's happening. And I think a great friend of mine, Brooks David, who was with state police, who did talk to me about kind of his own struggle with PTSD. And and things of that nature. But he was really the only first responder that I could get to talk to me so openly about the topic of PTSD. I was very pleasantly surprised that, Rob reached out and said, listen, we have to start talking about this. This really encompasses every single branch of any first responder, really, or anybody at home even who has been through something. They can be a victim of PTSD.
So I think we need to broaden that. So I said, I think of you and what you do in your career and the things you see. These are not normal things. So we always want to relate it to military. So I can give a quick story of when I returned from, I was a rescuer on the state search and rescue team and did 2 weeks in operations at the World Trade Center, and came home, and 3 Vietnam veterans, great brother firefighters, who I knew were wartime veterans, came up to me outside of a church ceremony that we attended and said, if you need to talk, we're here for you. We know what you saw, right? We know what you saw. And I said, my first instinct right back to them was, oh no, you were at war. People were trying to kill you. It's different than what I did. I didn't want to be in the same, you guys are heroes.
Category, yeah.
So it's just like, and I just talked to this guy at this most recent 9/11 ceremony we attended, and I said, I thank you for that. It was amazing he did that. But so we, again, we put it in the military aspect. Now we start to say, and I think not broad enough, say, oh, it's police, oh, it's fire, oh, maybe some nurses, and I said, well, what about you? What about your career? What about, I said, my therapist. I've had my therapist. I've cracked them with horrific stories to see them cry, because we're human beings, and that's the thing. It's everybody. So it could be the one traumatic incident in your personal life if you're not a rescuer. And so post-traumatic stress is not just related to public service type careers or horrific jobs or things you see. It could be any incident that you experience that can do this to you. So I look at it as, again, if we would start treating this like any other illness. So I had guilt in so-and-so got cancer at Firehouse, and everybody felt bad. Well, Will's got PTSD. Here's in therapy saying, that's wrong. That, I just said, I feel guilty. And she's like, no, you have a true illness here. This is an illness. And in some cases, prolonged 30 years, you will have a physical change to your brain. And she asked me to look it up. So you could see, as you experience memories over long terms, like I did, things get stored in the wrong places. So when they do brain scans while they have you thinking or talking about certain topics, they're in different spots in the brain than they belong, right? So, and they said, so you'll have a physical change in your brain. And so she said, you have a physical injury, potentially you have a physical injury with your brain. And that's why long-term exposure, you really may never recover. You'll cope, you'll deal, but you may never physically recover from a physical injury.
Let's talk about your journey with PTSD, because I think when we spoke on the phone, you said something that stuck with me. And it was the fact that it was this love-hate relationship that you had with the job, right? That you loved doing what you were doing as a firefighter, but for the longest time, all you would see around you was everything through these dark colored glasses, where you could not shake this, I guess, the gloom of the job either.
I can think back to literally 22 years old in the back of an open cab engine kind of thing, way back in the day, and my first cardiac arrest. And I still remember the call clearly. That's interesting, right? You remember that call. I remember the look of the gentleman laying back in a car with his foot on the gas pedal, the doors open, and I said, he's dead. And I've never seen a dead person, really. I was just like, wow, here it is. And the 2 senior guys get off, the captain and the senior guy, and they just yank this guy out of the car and do their job. They start CPR, and I'm listening to them. They're talking to each other like it's just every day. And then we went back and had lunch. And I thought, okay, this is the fire service. What about the dead guy? This guy just died. And I know his name. I won't say his name. And because I remember him growing up. You work in a small community, you grow up in a small community, and so many people that adds to this, right? So, but I was just thinking, this is the job. Okay. And then I thought, I can do this. Because the thing about that was, I am not good under slow pressure. I've learned that about me. I did commercial HVAC, and I'd be on jobs trying to figure out the problem. And I'd be stuck in my own head. I learned that I take things very seriously. I want to be the best at what I do. And when it happens fast, I just act. And I said, I had a note in here that one of the senior guys said to me, man, when you're on calls, you're so dialed in. And I thought, because it's a quick reactive pressure. I don't have time to debate about it, think about it. I take charge and I do what I'm trained to do. And I make sure my skill set is up. So I told myself early in my career, I want to go to calls. I just read that in my journal. I want to go to calls because I want to give them the best chance they have. So I love helping people. I'm young, I'm aggressive, and I realized early on I can cope with that. We went back and said, what's for lunch? Oh, this is the way it works. So it just is what it is. That builds over time. The next cardiac arrest, the next cardiac arrest. I once tried to figure out how many times I've done CPR. And you might know somebody who's done it once, oh, I did that once, I learned it. I lost track. I just, we look back after 30 years and go, I can remember doing it 3 times in a day on multiple occasions. It's just like, so there's 3 people lost their lives. And so, I look and say, wow, I've handled again, traumatic type, maybe even not, I'd like to say traumatic because it's traumatic for a family who lost somebody, usually they're doing CPR on somebody in front of a family. And so, but I still could cope with it. And I always said to myself, I did my best. I gave them their best shot. If you could put a positive on every call you go to, is a 911 call. There's generally, I'd say to people, if you dial 911, you have a problem. I don't care if your basement's flooding. It's like
it's not usually a good part of your life that you're calling 911.
You're generally never going to be happy with me coming to your house. So it became finding balance. So my great favorite term is balance. And so I have to provide good and bad. One of the final breaking points became the number 10. And it was the 10th child I'd seen dead on a call. And I just couldn't shake it. So they say PTSD is like building a reel of photos, and then the reel starts to play one day, and then you can't turn the reel off anymore. It always plays. So, and it plays every day of my life. There's not a day that passes in my life where some memory doesn't pop because of something you said. We talked earlier before we started this, and I said, wow, you just put me in a zone. Just the comment puts me right back into a scene, visible. It's so clear in my mind, and then the coping part of that is moving on. So, but again, a long-term career of death and destruction, and 9/11 was another spot in the middle of that career that stood out, but I just pushed that aside. I isolated that, and we're not even going to talk about that. I'm just going to focus on fire. That's 9/11. So that was different. These are all mechanisms of burying emotions and burying feelings. And I'd gone, again, you learn not to cry. The senior guys in the department back then said, suck it up. This is what happened. So I remember one of our early, fatals in my career, 3 children on a Mother's Day fire. So that's the other thing. Every holiday became what memory is attached to that holiday. Fire on this one. Oh, the Easter when grandma was down and the family sitting there crying over grandma while I'm doing CPR, and the priest came and did last rites, and I can remember this. These are surreal moments, right? So the 10 children piled up, and the reel started, and I couldn't shake it anymore. And I laid in bed at night just over and over in my mind, playing out the 10. I didn't want to get them out of order. It became this weird cycle of, if I remembered them out of order, I was disrespecting them. If I, so there was so many things that piled up. And now I have, again, I told you I wrote in this journal, my favorite journal, for years. And I could go call by call by call there. So it wasn't just the 10 kids anymore. It became laying in bed at night and driving through the city of Cohoes in my mind and trying to remember the calls on the block. Oh, I remember that call. I remember this call. I remember this call. I remember that call. And then you found it strange if you forgot about one. But just reading the journal, prepping for this, I'm like, oh, I forgot about that one. Do you ever forget? But it became a pile.
Thank you for that journal, right?
It became, again, it's a never-ending, unsurmountable weight that gets piled on over time. It's an unspoken rule in the firehouse, like, oh, I know his worst call. I know her worst call. And we only know this because I see the reaction. If I bring up a certain call to a friend of mine, he turns right away. It's traumatic. They don't want to think about it. And we know that's his button. And I know his button, and I know his button, because we know the call that hurt them, right? And it never goes away. So they have a scar, right? I think I shared the analogy in our conversation of early on, then I put my suit of armor on and I said, now I'm safe and I don't cry and I don't talk about it. When we lost those 3 children, the senior captain said, if you can't handle this, then you go. You don't belong here. And they brought in some mental health people early on in my career, and he sent them away and said, no, we don't do that here. And they have to handle it or they don't belong here. And that's the way he was brought up, right? A lot of those old time firefighters, all alcoholics and things like that. That was their thing back in the day. They all drank. Well, you have to wonder why. Right. We have why were they drinking so much back in that day, and I talked to a lot of retired police officers, the same thing. Oh, this guy, that guy, who's here forever. Wow, he's a drunk. Why?
Yeah.
Because they're scarred. So I said, I put on that armor, never shed a tear after that. My mom, who, just said, you are not the same guy anymore. You have no emotion. Think about this. So you just talk about, I go, kids die, Mom. Okay. People die every day, including kids. That's life. And that's, so again, 9/11 happened, came home, and that's the crack. That was the real dent in the armor. I fell on my knees and sobbed. I hadn't cried in 10 years and I sobbed, and my wife was shocked. I was on my knees in front of her sobbing. Again, how many emotions go with that? Oh my goodness, what did I just do? I'm the strength, I'm the guy, I'm the support, I'm the, and she just saw me break, right? So no, let's just say it was a slow downhill battle after that, right? Just, as I read my journal, day before the firehouse is hard. 2 days before the firehouse is hard. Why am I even going back to the firehouse? I can't keep doing this. I read notes in here. I can't keep doing this. But you keep going. You keep going. And it becomes tunnel vision, where your whole broad view of this great life you built, of marriage and kids and home and career and my ambitions to make fire chief and so forth. And all of a sudden you're on this narrow path of survival. Just talked to my wife on the phone and said, oh my goodness, honey, what did I do to you? It's just saying bad day, tired, short-tempered, yelled at my wife or I took off. It became my safe place was north. I always said, my therapist said, I think you need to take a ride north because I needed a mental getaway. But she said, you run away. You're running away all the time. And there's this whole disassociation. You just don't know how to cope because you're not a pro, right? So to me, the therapist, like when you have a body ache, you go to your doctor, they are what you need. And you don't know you need it until you start going.
Let's go back to a couple of different things, starting with 9/11. I think for any New Yorker and anybody really in the country, I mean, that's such a significant date. When your episode airs, we are coming up on, 20 years and a month almost to the day of 9/11 when this will air. And so there are moments that, I don't just, when the 9/11 anniversary just came up, I still go back into where I was a child. I was watching it happen from my school windows, right? Like we saw the first tower get hit, the second tower get hit, and then we saw the towers go down.
I didn't know your involvement in that because you came from the city. That's right.
Yeah.
I didn't know you
So
were connected to it and that close. That's interesting. Yeah.
One, I was that close and we were watching it, but two, I think, for a long time, I couldn't go back there, right? Because to me, as a child, that was so traumatic. And then, so you kind of push it out. And so it took me 18 years before I ever went back down to ground zero. I just went to the museum a few years ago, and even then I couldn't even go into the museum. I have to have like a parameter of like, what am I emotionally comfortable with going into? So as a first responder for you, I'm sure, like you said, you kind of disassociated both ways of like, okay, well, that was different. These are calls. This is not a terrorist attack. But I think overall, all these different things that we go through, they kind of pile on top of one another, right? And so, one of the things that we had talked about on the phone as well, and you kind of said it so well here kind of too, is we all go through things, right? And we kind of all know what our triggers are, and we all know what the things are that we are not okay with doing, right? Or that call. For me in reporting, a couple of things come to mind. I know that I had great friends who knew kind of what I was going through. And so anytime we would talk about a suicide, I was not allowed to read those stories because out of fear for that, like they feared for me that I just would not be able to handle it. And so, it took a long time to get okay with that. But I also thank them for just being so cautious of like, she's not okay with that, right? Like we have to be respectful of the fact that she's still human. But I can very vividly remember one of my first breaking news stories was a gentleman who had died on a motorcycle. And I remember getting spit on by somebody who's just like, you are the scum of the earth. This is like, you're a horrific human being for being out here with a camera. And you hate yourself in that moment. You do. You hate being there with somebody on their worst day, but it's still your job, right? Like that's the thing. And so I go back to it. I hated that moment because my brother's a motorcycle rider.
I know somebody needs to do these jobs, right? It's just and people, they can say what they want. People watch a lot of news. They want the report. We all want.
They do. Like people are funny. They're like, oh, we don't want you to do what you're doing, but we're gonna tune in, and like we're watching for every grim detail.
Yeah, I get it. And there's nothing that will describe the feeling of being on a scene, right? So you know this, right? So what's missing? And I remember, I feel so bad for poor Amanda. I stood over her looming one day. Picture me, right? Standing over her. You don't know anything about this. You know nothing. You're in your 20s or whatever. It's like I said, you don't know anything. The sights, the smells, the sounds, that's what you don't get, right? So you get film. You're there. You can feel the emotion in the air. You can feel the energy in the air. You can, I put hands on these people, and it's amazing. But the smells, so anything can remind you of that. And I think it's great you have this network of people who understand. And people do that for me. They would call and check on me, and you love that. And that's, the true coworker. There's the people who want to disassociate again, and then you have this network. And at the same time, you may feel like you don't want that protection, because now I started to worry that they're babying me, right? So I'm the guy in charge. I was the captain. And now they don't want me to go on that. Oh, that's okay. No. I have to go on these calls. It's still my job. You can't protect me from this, okay? I need to protect you from this. It's like, but I needed protection also. So but there's just things if we're gonna stay in the game, that we learn to cope with, we learn to deal with, and you will go on that call again, and you will see that call again, and you'll adjust and use a coping mechanism to be able to handle that call. But no, people may not really understand, again, as you're talking about the World Trade Center, for example, but I put that in a box. She wanted to talk about it, and I said, no, I'm good. So my first year in treatment, 9/11 kind of came and went, and I was like, no, I'm not really going to talk about it. It's like, it's kind of still in the box, and then we did talk about it, and it was horrific, so I said, at the same time, the most pride I've ever felt in being a firefighter, because I got to go help at the biggest incident in our nation's history since Pearl Harbor, right? So I'm going to be there, and I'm going to help. The things I remember clearly, shutting down immediately on first day. And I remember the incident that shut me down. And I remembered learning this in a class early on in my career, where they showed a burn victim in a car, and the reporters were all filming it, right? So they put out the car fire, and the body's in the front seat, and they said, watch the police officer. And the police officer was watching, the firefighter, the victim started to move, and he was burned beyond. So it was a training video for us, and the police officer spun around, 180, like, done. They said, he is done dealing with that. His body just said, I'm done. And I clearly remember doing the same thing at the World Trade Center. They basically pulled the torso out, and that was it. And I saw them pass this torso, and that's the largest part of a person I saw for the remainder of the time. And I just remember spinning around. I do. I remember just going, I can't even react to this. It's like, it's just some things that it's unreasonable, right? It's just, but I continued, did my first week, and then, the honor in this was, we're going to handpick the team who goes back for week 2. So I'm chosen, and my heart is thumped in my chest when they chose me. I'm like, oh no, it's like, so I have this thank you very much moment, and I don't want to go. There were so many surreal moments. I arrived day 1 in the evening, and I just remember getting there. It was dark at that point, so I was not there during the collapse. And I think about the people who were. You saw, you heard, you smelled this. I pulled my boots out the other day that I just dropped on the floor in my basement, and they're still covered in that white dust and still smell. And the bottoms are sticky. So I'm thinking there was something acidic, probably. They're just literally disintegrating. the images arriving to the buildings all burning still and the smoke in the air, and you couldn't get near the trade center because everything was on the, covered the bridges and so forth. And we set up, on West and Vesey, our command post, and quickly split up into 12-hour tours. And I was on the midnight tour and paired up with another great guy. We try to chat once a year, Pete Rizzo out of Rochester. He's now retired. And he and I, we chat probably just once a year to say, how you doing, on that day. And he said, wow, I have so many memories of touring through that pile with you. And it's like, yeah, we tell people nothing survived a 100-story office building. How does that happen? There's no desks, there's no chairs, there's nothing that looks like an office building. You don't see keyboards, computer screens. Where'd they all go? They're disintegrated. Where are the people? With that. So I could show you pictures I personally took, and you're not going to be able to pick anything out of it other than debris, right? So, but everything that survived was paper. We picked up a magazine one day. On the back of that magazine was an ad with the World Trade Centers lit up at night, and we're sitting in the pile. They tried to explain that magnitude to us on the way down in the buses. Okay, prep, we're going to give you all the information. And you got there and said, wow, this is like blocks, city block. Yeah. It's like of a pile that we're going to be sifting through. I found a family photo album, the little ones that with the flip albums that you used to get, and all the pictures were intact. And there was a family at a Yankee game, and I'm looking at it going, this is somebody's, were they here? I don't know. And you'd be sitting in the debris, taking a break, and you'd be on, oh, this is office whatever on this floor, because everything there is got the person's name on it, or the business cards and office paperwork and letterheads. And so you'd be in an office, legitimately like sitting in what's settled that was somebody's office. So really strange, very surreal moments, and images and visions, but to see people that were just walking around like zombies. I recognized firefighters who trained us. The team was taught by a lot of Rescue 3 company members and FDNY Rescue Company guys, and to see guys who had lost people they personally knew. I knew some of the people lost. Some of these guys I remember had traded shifts, so they should have been there and they weren't there. Imagine living with this stuff. So brothers wearing their brother's fire helmets, looking for their brother. It's just, there's so many things. The rescue dogs broke mentally. Literally, they started having us lay down in the pile so they could find us, because the dogs couldn't find anybody. And these are trained dogs, and they said their animals are starting to be stressed beyond their limits.
What an image for you to even bring up the dogs, that like, we don't even realize how much stress we carry. And then to see it happen in an animal who doesn't even understand the magnitude of what we saw, what we understand, right? Like, they are stressed. And then to think that we as humans are immune to this, or that we can get past it by just being like, I've been there.
Though, right? So here it's okay to go treat that dog too, right? You did funny analogy here, right? Though, but the poor dog, well, how about all the poor people, right? It's just everybody there. There's so many thousands that are affected. And again, I put that in a compartment. I still look at it with great pride, but it was, when I came home again and broke because our family was doing the American thing, and they threw the community wanted to do a little party and remembrance. And I'm thinking, remembrance, they're still there. They're still down there. And I'm home now. And so I didn't want to be there. And now I wanted to be there. And they said, I have still a lot of military. They come back and they want to go back. It's like, so I felt like I needed to be back there. And what are we doing here? Singing songs and God bless America, and it's like I was not in the right mood for this, but I just remembered, I said, how twisted did my mind become when I felt elated that I found a human thigh.
It's kind of like I'm helping whoever this human,
send somebody home to their family.
Yeah, we'll get some kind of closure.
But you have to, so this is where the firefighting goes back to running the burning building, do everything opposite, and wear it like it's okay, right? Yeah. It's okay to see destruction, it's okay to see death, and it's okay to do this. And it's just, and find the good in that. And that's always what we're trying to do, is find the good in the bad, right? So, but that, when I remember now, when I did break down in therapy and talk about that, I was thinking, man, that's a twisted mind. I literally had my mind twisted 180, facing the other direction, saying, this is great, look at this, but the smells, and, they talked jokingly, and people, there's a lot of laughter, unfortunately, that goes in our businesses, right? You've been on scenes. What are they all doing? Standing in a circle, laughing, talking about.
We all do. I've laughed at death more than I
You'd be standing.
That's the only way to cope, right? I mean, you see some of the worst moments. I mean, you're on these calls, and again, I have not seen what you have seen. I have seen, you know, to my own level of stress. I think
it's not comparative, and
it's not comparative, but but my immune system is shot, right? It's like, Paulina, I can't take any more shock and any more stress. Like, give me a break. And so I understand when you say that, you know, after so long, you know, that 10th child, you're just like, that's it. I can't do anymore.
I guess you reach your max. You know, a friend of mine likes to put it, and I'd love to see get help, but cup's full. It's actually over full, and I'm not talking about it. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Even so many years later, I think people really underestimate how much of that trauma kind of stays in our body, and how our bodies and our minds go back into these moments, or the anticipation of like
right?
Like it was yesterday. It really is. And so
it's still that raw, right? Exactly. It's just, unless somebody's experienced that, then they don't really probably don't understand what you're saying when it's like, no, it's like it was yesterday. It hurts that bad, you know. It's like so, yeah.
It does, and it doesn't hurt like that all the time, right? Like, I think that's the thing that people need to understand. Like, it's not like I'm walking around in pain constantly. I think there was a time when I was in constant pain. But right now it's more of just, you go back, you remember, like you said it so well too, you know, like there are sights, smells, and things that you remember. And it's true, you know, we were on the phone and we were talking about just kind of going back into those things that add up, right? That like, so that was your first big experience, the where you probably witnessed and suffered PTSD from that, but it was never diagnosed then, it was never treated then. And so you went from one traumatic experience and then went through a whole career, a firefighting career, where you just continue to add on stress and continue to add on
prolonged exposure to traumatic events. And you can, I think just anybody can cope for so long. I mean, maybe there's different personality types or whatever. They said, you know, we had discussed in, you know, previous to this recording about family life and what makes you, right? So, so I read a little about your story, and you kind of, you know, when this happened, you went on the road and distanced yourself. You went to the other coast and just started coping and doing things, and maybe making good decisions and bad decisions, but you're just making decisions. You're just away and you're doing your thing.
It.
So exactly. And I said, I think that's where you get caught. I said, my life growing up, the way I grew up, you know, I have loving parents, but they were teenagers with kids, and I experienced a lot of drug use and alcohol and spousal abuse. And I grew up in all this. And my mom, sadly, because she grew up in a worse environment, I like to say they provided a much nicer environment for us, my brothers and I. But I can't imagine how she grew up. But she said, oh, it builds character. Really? I said, I don't think it builds character at all. I think it's traumatic. And I said, you know, so
yeah,
she had to cope how she coped, you know. So we talked yesterday about this, but I said they did everything they could, right? And but you do your best. That's all you can do. I grew up watching the struggle, watch the work, them giving of their time to everybody and anybody. I said, and created the person that I became of, I'm going to be that guy, and I'm going to give, and I'm going to help. So I have this need and this drive to help, right? So I landed in the career that I love. And I look back, and, you know, I was just reading in my journal, one of the guys with about 5 years on, war veteran, and I said, geez, I feel terrible some days about this. And he said, well, nothing, you did 30 years. There's nothing to be ashamed of here, buddy. You know, it's like, it wears down, it can wear down anybody. You know, it's like physically I was worn down, mentally I was worn down. And they go hand in hand, and people don't realize that, right? Lack of sleep. I constantly wrote, a retired firefighter from FDNY, who became a friend with, said, I asked this senior guy, why are you retiring? You're in great shape. And he goes, because I'm tired of being tired. Tired of being tired. The constant theme throughout this journal is, I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm tired. And mental stress makes you tired, makes you physically tired. Those things can lead to true physical ailments. I look back a few years ago and I had pneumonia. I tore a shoulder. I had pneumonia. I got shingles. I was like, I'm in stress related, probably shingles too, they say, right? And I'm thinking, I'm going through all this stuff.
And that also adds on top to your mental health, right? Because you're just like, oh, now I'm sick. Now I can't go to work. Now I can't do this. And again, you're just kind of piling on.
I look back and I said, did I want to be sick? Because it's like, sick was the reason not to go to work, right? It's like, it just, you don't even know what it is, you know, as I look at it. It was just this constant struggle, though, wasn't it? To me, this whole 3 years looks like a daily struggle. I'm writing down the struggle. Good day today. But when you're starting to look at every day, as I'm having a good day or I'm having a bad day. You're evaluating yourself daily, right? So that's because there's no long-term going on here. It's like, I'm just trying to get through today and the next day and the next day and trying to make every day a good day. So I barely write in the journal now, right? You're 2.5 years out. I look back, I haven't written in this in forever. Long-term, you look ahead to long-term and retirement and all these things. And so, yeah, I mean, the treatment is a savior. Acceptance of PTSD is important, just like in anything else. We can go back to, I'll keep relating this to the physical thing. Oh, I have a pain that I didn't go to the doctor for a year, and now I have this wrong with me, and I should have done something last year. So I sometimes look at my career and with anger and say, PTSD took my career from me. It stole my career. I was too young to leave. I could have stayed. I was going to stay longer. I wanted to make chief. I was on the list. And I knew I had to go. But I look back now and say, hey, I'm here. My family's doing well. I'm doing well. I stopped causing them all the stress. I'm lucky I survived my marriage. I really am. And I sometimes look back and say, geez, what damage did I do? And it wasn't choice. I wasn't trying to do this. But it's the side effect. It's what comes from it. So when we talk about this and doing what you're doing, this is huge. If you could get people to get help earlier, then they can learn coping skills, and they need to. It's no different than exercise to take care of your heart, and there's exercises you do to take care of your mind.
It starts with like a small ailment, and we think that it's just going to stay there, and like, okay, it's the one stress that I experienced, and you kind of move on, get busy, and do other things. But over time, all of that feeds off of one another, right? So like, we said you were tired. Yeah, well, you're tired. You're mentally tired. You're emotionally tired. And people don't realize that actually probably, I almost want to say the emotional and psychological tired is worse than being physically tired. Because you can go to bed and wake up and you'll be fine. Emotionally, when you are tired, your body aches.
It's like, yeah, it does. It's true. It's true. Yeah. Totally with you on that. You wake up tired. Said you slept all night and you wake up tired. I wrote that in my journal here. Didn't even go on a call last night. And I'm exhausted. And it's like, it just, I don't know why, but it's physically written down. The fun thing about writing and looking back was there's a reality in the word, right? So you can think it and then you can put it in a box and move on. But as I read this, and I offer it to people sometimes, take it, read it. Because it's just a jumble of words, right? So not well written, there's punctuation and spelling, and I was just scribbling as fast as I could.
That's it, just to get it out.
Yeah, and but it's amazing when again, you look back at that written word to a scary point. I think I shared this with you, where I said I had. Let's see if you can see, right? Maybe I'll share that. Firefighter standing on the edge of a cliff, right?
You are one heck of an artist.
I did some of these things, like all the ghosts standing behind me, right? So they were just little scribblings, but that was right there. I'm getting close to the edge. But then in learning, all I have to do is step back and I'm okay. It's like, so, but how many people don't step back, right? We talk about, so when I wrote this, I followed up on it later on and realized when I was saying that I'm on the edge of a cliff, that's the suicidal ideation that came in. And that's the hardest part to talk about, the scariest part to talk about, because then people really think you're weak-minded, right? Oh, you're weak now. But you literally don't see the way out. You're stuck in that tunnel vision, I said. I think I have pictures of a tunnel I drew, the dark circle. It's like where I said you're traveling down this dark and you miss the future, anything happening on peripheral, you're just locked into that zone. And I read that to my therapist, and I'm thinking, wow, what did I mean? One more bad call and I'm going to fall off the cliff. What is that? What did I just say? So to read that written word was a real harsh reality for me, even that, oh, this is what I was thinking. I'm thinking suicide.
It's interesting how far we go down in a rabbit hole that we were not expecting. You journal, I journal. When I go back, I'm like, wow, I was really in a dark place. Yeah. That was not okay. And I don't think we realize how far gone we are, or how far in our own head and our own insecurity or our own trauma we are stuck until you read it back. Like I love that you say that. I love that you have this documentation to show you, like, I was okay at some point, or even show this progress of where you were so bad to where you are doing so much better right now. I know for you, Will, you've talked a lot about going to therapy. You talk a lot about journaling. And so let's talk a little bit about the type of therapy that you did, because I was very pleasantly surprised. And this is what kind of drew us together. You and I both have been through EMDR, and I am a major advocate for anybody who has been through any kind of trauma. I know that so this is another thing that I want to bring up before we even get into that. Trauma looks so different for everybody, and the trauma response looks so different. And so for some people, like we were just saying, for me, it was running away, right? I ran away from all my problems.
Right. Yeah,
that was my way of coping. I was great at running away. I'm still great at running away. Okay. Like I will tell you what I need to tell you. And then I'm like, I'm out of here. I bolt like lightning. But at the same time, I know that when I try to hide, I try to put on more makeup. I try to look glam. I am all done to the nines to make sure that facade is on there.
I love that facade. They're saying no one saw it in me. I can't tell you how many people. I was just at a wedding recently. I had no idea. I'm like, how could you not know? It's like I was falling apart for years, and
nobody knows.
Except we're home, right? You go behind closed doors and take your makeup off, right? Is what you do, right? And then you just fall apart and sit down and again disassociate. All these things that go with PTSD or anxiety or any type of mental health, where I just isolation. Leave me alone. I'm tired. I just want to stay in my den.
Yeah.
My space. I just need to sit here. I just need to have a beer. I just need a few beers to help me sleep. I just need any coping mechanism you can come up with, but it's a lot of isolation and dark places, right? Legitimate dark places, right?
Right. Those dark places. So for me, it was crying. I hate crying. Like there was nothing that I hated more.
I
love it now. Oh, listen, it took me, this has been a 5-year battle to get to where I am today, where I feel comfortable crying in front of somebody. I used to get mad at myself when I would even feel a tear coming up. I'm like, oh, ring it. Like I would give myself the riot act, it was just like, ring it back in. This is not you. You were like, buck up. Like you are strong. You've been through this. You've been through that. Like you are not going to break down. This is not what breaks you down.
Crying is a physical response that really like releases endorphins, and you feel better when you're done. And then
that's not how I saw it. Well, by the time I ended up in therapy, my therapist he'd laugh. He's like, you're like a slipping slide. He's like, you're just crying all the time. I'm like, I can't stop it. Like I'm so broken. Like, stop this. Where are the tear ducts? Like, how do you turn this off?
It became my little place to go, and I just fall apart every time. I just walk in and say, where's the tissues? It's like, because I have calls, and I was still on the job then. So I'd say, you're going to wait till you hear this. I knew if I even tried, I couldn't get a word out.
Yeah.
Absolutely couldn't get a word out. And so I love that, though. I love it. It became I wrote, you'd notice in this, therapy, great day. Love therapy now, because it was a release. I learned that it was the release where I get to dump all this out there, learn a new task. I'd have homework every time. I liked homework. She'd always give me, I want you to think about this, or I want you to try that. So we'll go to your EMDR. So I fought that. I don't want it. Don't think I need it. And so I was in thank goodness. It's weird. So Amanda she was pregnant. So she's going to leave for maternity leave. And she said, well, I don't want to just leave you. I really want you to see someone else. And I'm like, nope, you're it. You're the only one. I'm not doing this anymore. So she's like, no, I really think so. Who I ended up seeing was Kathleen Hoffman. I laugh. I tell Kathleen, she kind of freaked me out. She's very personal, and she kind of looked me in the eyes and said, you're going to be okay. And I'm thinking, this woman's crazy. I'm not going to do it. It's like not a term I'm supposed to be using or anybody, but I was like, she's really she's an emotional person, and she's wonderful. At first I was a little put off because she wasn't Amanda, someone different. And I'm like, I don't know, so, but we had a horrific murder call. I shared the story with you. I was in full protection mode, early morning call, get there, deal with the PD, tell my people you're not going to see it. I still remember this poor young medic. He went in, somebody had to go clear the scene and say, dead is dead. It's just what it is. So they go and put a monitor on, and he came out white as a ghost. It really affected this kid. But at the end of my career was a horrific call. I think I explained to you that I read the dispatch reports while doing my paperwork and saw the commentary where this girl was begging for her life, and the poor dispatchers, as I said, we forget about this. They're typing what they're hearing. And they're stuck. There's nothing they can do, right? There's no run and help. There's no call anybody. They are the person who gets called, right? So talk about trauma in their own career, right? They showed me a picture of the woman, and I recognized her from grocery shopping. I see her every week. And I went into a Hannaford, and I see her. I just, to this day, I go there and I see her, right? It's like, and I still shop. But when I went in, I had a panic attack and didn't know what a panic attack was. So I got sweaty, pale. Oh, geez, did I eat breakfast before I came here? I don't know. I'm not feeling so good. And then I dropped the 2-liter bottle of soda right out of my hand on the floor. Slow motion. What the heck is going on here? My heart's racing. I got to get out of here. I don't know what just happened. I feel like I was having a heart attack or something, but tell Amanda. Amanda's like, yeah, you got a panic attack. I'm like, really? I've heard of them. I've seen people hyperventilate.
Never had one.
But I never had one. I go back to that Hannaford a month later and with my wife shopping, and we ran into a neighbor and we're talking, and I felt it coming. I was like, this is not good. What's going on here? I just felt like I was going down. And I said, I got to go. We got to go. And went out in the car, and I broke as bad as I did on that 9/11 tour. I was sobbing. Like it's hard to think about, honestly. I couldn't even breathe. And I was sobbing in the car. And my wife says, you're done. This is it. It's retirement time for you. There's no trying to stay in the game now. You got to get out of this, So I went back. I remember going to Kathleen, and I read in my notes here, I'm afraid to go back to work because if I break in front of my people, I've lost all credibility. So now I'm done, right? If I go out on that note, I'm done. I'm the leader. I'm the tough guy. I'm the guy. The joke about me was I had the strongest stomach of anyone. I could tolerate anything. What's your kryptonite kind of thing? I didn't have kryptonite, but this ruined me. So I now said, I can't go to work like this. What if I did that? I had no control over this. And so I went in, and she said, let's do the EMDR. And I told her no. When this happened, I went in and said, yeah, now today, let's do it. This session, let's do this. It's like whatever that is, I got to try something because that cannot happen ever again. The pretense, as I'm told, process of making you go left side, right side, right side, just like your eyes do in REM sleep. It's your brain working in that function, and things get placed where they're supposed to be. So I didn't buy into this at all. Let me tell you,
nothing. Same. Listen, I say this on one of the episodes. When I walked into my therapist's office that day, I had my arms crossed, and I was like, I'm fucked up. There is no help for me.
It's not going to work.
Like, this is not going to work. I've done therapy before. Like, what's your best shot? Come at me, okay?
Yeah. I was the same way. I was in a couple of years of therapy. Yeah, this isn't good. So now we talk about that goal. And on a 10 scale, what's it on a 10 scale? We use scales and measuring, and I'm like, it's a 12. And I legitimately, no joke here, see the bloodbath on the wall. I see the blood on the floor. I still physically see this thing. It's like, and I was a mess. And I'm like, this is terrible, so I'm sobbing over this and hate the guy who did it and just emotionally spent. And so we go through the process and take some breaths. Tapping ensues, back and forth. Let's discuss it again. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? Now, trying to gauge as to what part of that hurts you the most, right? So she said to me, I wrote a note here too, I suffer from the moral injury, right? There's a moral factor in this. How could somebody do this? 9/11, yeah. How can somebody do that over anything? So she said, oh, you suffer from this moral type of, stress. So I said, yeah. So either way, we keep going through the process. And by the time you're done, half hour later or whatever, I'm now breathing normal. I'm now talking about the call normal. Do you think she's suffering anymore, Will? Well, no, of course not. Okay. And then I literally went from, I hate that bastard who did this, to that poor guy. Probably got some mental health issue going on. And that guy, he ruined his life, his family's life, her family's life, everybody's life. So instead of hate, sympathy comes out, right? So you think it's sympathy for the guy who did it, but it's a whole different thing. So when I came out of it, I was shocked. Let's say that. And I openly say shocked at the change in the thought. And I'm thinking, this is impossible. Like it's some trickery here, right? This cannot be true, right? So people go, it sounds like a bunch of BS. And I'm like, if I didn't physically go through this process, I would be right there with you. And I was right there with you. Yeah. So came back and we let's work on some other calls. And I'm thinking, I'm good. We'd start with the other call. And I'd be like, I kind of have the whole process in my mind now of what that did. And she goes, I think I put a lot of things in a group together when I was going through it, because she said, normally it takes a lot of effort, more treatments of this. And I really didn't go back through many at all. I get it. I kind of get it, because the same questions always came up. Do you think that child's suffering? Do you think this person? Well, no, it's just there now. I just get it. It's just, I just get it. I don't know. It's like, so, and that's where I left it. So I've never had a panic attack again. I shop in Hannaford every week. I think of her, but it doesn't melt.
It doesn't bother you anymore.
Yeah.
So I love that you say that there, for me, I think it was the physical change that I felt like you, leaving from the session. And I go back to my first session with my therapist, Mark, in Lafayette, Louisiana. And I was, like I said, dead set against it. All I did online, I said, I knew that I had gone through a trauma. I didn't know, I wasn't calling it PTSD or anything like that. I just knew I needed a trauma specialist, because what I'd been through, what I'd seen, and what I continued to see now on the job, and the experiences I had were just like you, were triggering me from left to right. And I thought I wasn't going to let this get in the way of my job. I was not going to let my dad's suicide get in the way of me becoming successful and me doing what I do. So I think so many things that you said throughout this interview kind of, resonate, because I'm like, while I had great friends who were like, oh, we can't let her do a suicide story, I was here going like, I'm going to challenge myself to be better at this. I'm going to challenge myself to be okay with it. And I'm going to look it in the face, and I'm going to tackle it, and it's not going to get me, but it still does, right? Like it piles on, and it continues to weigh you down in other ways. So for me, Mark was like, okay, so what are we tackling today? And I kind of just offhandedly was just like, let's do guilt, right? Like I have guilt from my dad's suicide. And I never thought the guilt was as big as it was until we started doing.
I use those keywords like guilt. I looked throughout my journal. I had these words. I'd focus on pain, grief, guilt. As all these, the word is a topic in itself that we study, right? Yeah. So
yeah. And so I remember going through this time with him and this session with him, and it got to the point where I love that he would challenge me, because I have a very strong personality. So I'm kind of like, we're going to go head to head on this. I know better, right? Like I've done my Wikipedia, Google search, like I know better. So
you're a master. They know more than you do.
They do. And so I love that he challenged me, and he was like, we went through the different variations of kind of the guilt that I was carrying and I was holding. And some of that stemmed from just kind of, it stemmed from the suicide itself, and then different things that I had heard, after that, and all these different emotions that popped up. It got to the point where he was just like, do it. Tell me right now that you were the one who pulled the trigger. Tell me that you were the one who killed your dad. And I couldn't get a word out. It was the first time I started sobbing so uncontrollably. Like I felt it here. I felt it just on my chest, in my throat, and I couldn't get the words out because they weren't real. And it's like this is the subconsciously what I had told my body, what I had kind of held on to, that if I had gotten there earlier, I would have been the one to save him.
Should have felt the sun, should have,
everything, right? Like, I heard from my own grandmother who said to me, if you had not called the police, then maybe your dad would be alive. And as much as I didn't believe that, I think some part of me subconsciously did believe that like, if I didn't call police, if I had woken up earlier, if we had done this or done that, and you go down all these different avenues. And so when I'm sitting here in therapy, and I didn't look for EMDR found me. And I have this therapist who's, kind of going head to head with me. And he's like, tell me right now that you pulled the trigger. Tell me right now that you're the one who did that. And I didn't know I was suffering PTSD, right? I didn't even think that was something I could say that I was going through.
What is it? I posed that question because I heard the term so many times, and
right.
People that I think I told you about the day when I said, do you think I have PTSD? And she's like, oh yeah, 100%. And I was like, really? It's like, shocked guy. Really? You think so? It's like, oh yeah.
Like I haven't seen war. I haven't seen things. I go out on stories and talk to people who are traumatized all the time. I see dead bodies. That's fine. But no, there's no such thing as PTSD in my head. At least it can't be happening to me.
Yeah. Oh, I get it. I did the same thing. No, I don't know what you're talking about. It's just like, you really think I have it? Wow. Well, they said EMDR was an amazing process. And I swear by it now. And I wish I could push more people to it, that, not that they say it works for everybody, but it was for me. It did work for me. And I think, but again, there's a lot of tools in the box now, right? So there was a therapeutic tools of, again, the choices I think we talked about, where I said I have a choice on how I feel about something. So if I'm having a bad day, I actually wrote in here about teaching my kids to use this, right? My 3 kids. It's a choice to anticipate, to worry about things that are not in your control. In hindsight, is 2020, as they say. So you can look back at all those things. And I remember writing that also in here was like, I did this to myself. I was in tears. I asked for this. I wanted to be on those calls. I begged to go on those calls. I asked to do this job. I wanted to be the best guy at this job. It's like, and I did this to myself. I broke myself. What was I thinking? So it's but
that's the job talking.
Yeah, right.
That's the job, honestly, Will, because I don't know, it's so many newsies that I speak to now. And again, we have very different professions, but even anybody who's in a high stress, high profile job in terms of just kind of the things that you see, we almost challenge ourselves to be like, how far can we go before we break, if we break?
Right.
Well, but then I think most people do break. They just don't call it a break, right? Like we said, there's alcoholism, there's drug use, there's going down just severe mental health issues that never get resolved. And that is a break, whether or not we want to call it a break or not. You can
talk about the guys, many guys, oh, that guy's checked out. He doesn't do anything outside of here involved in the fire service. Maybe a reason for that, right? It's like, so we get on those guys and razz them a little bit. Like, you're not taking classes, you're not doing this. And because they don't want their mind there 24 hours a day, right? When they go home, they go home. Don't pretend it's not coming home, okay? So there's no leaving it at work, right? It always came home, always. So common thing you hear out in our world is don't bring that baggage home with you. And it's an impossible task, impossible. So I learned that over time. Don't discredit my wife and her ability to listen to me. Communication, as we say, is the greatest thing you can do, right? And clear communication in all of these careers or in mental health, and being able to openly discuss it and talk about it and share it with the right people, appropriate people, is everything. It's everything.
We need to normalize the conversation about mental health and the struggles that we face and the side effects to the struggles that we face or the things that we've witnessed are natural and normal, and they make us who we are. That's it.
I think we're two pretty normal people, I'd like to think, right? And look at us, right?
For the most part, I think for the most part, we try to do our best, right?
It's a part of a club. It's a mental health club, and there's a lot of people that should be involved in this club. But I said, we pay our dues to get here, but that's fine, and that's okay. And now we get to be a part of this team, and we live in it. And that's fine. That's okay.
I love it. Yeah. I love being a part of this team. I think it builds character to some degree. Yeah. I wish that it came with a little less heartache, but I'm glad that if my heartache can help somebody else going through this, or maybe help somebody before they get to that point, then my work is done. Will Charbonneau, everybody. Thank you for listening. Will, thank you for being here.
Take care. Thanks again.
Yeah, I'm going for the ride and find myself, I am alive, and I saw